Yes, welcome all to this unfortunately last class of personal economics. So last week we predominantly discussed employees engaging in competition with each other. But fortunately, organizations, as they increasingly draw on teams, on team-based working, they not only engage in competition with each other, but there's much cooperation within organizations between employees. But of course, taking into account this cooperation, this changes some of the basic dynamics about compensation, about motivation that we have seen so far. So in today's class, we're going to mainly talk about how we can compensate and motivate employees, but in a team setting. Ultimately, of course, avoiding that some employees will take advantage of the team's effort while they contribute less or even nothing. The second part of today, so about team production, we will see that teams, they offer some unique performance advantages, but that there are also some mechanisms in place to pressure and to punish free riders, making them in some situations more efficient and more effective than individual incentive systems. Of course, at today's lecture, I hope that you understand and also recognize that in certain situations, team production and team-based incentive systems, they offer organizations a couple of advantages to motivate and reward employees collectively, and that they do so in an efficient and effective way. I also hope that after today that you forgive the free riders in all of your past group projects. They could not help it because they were only being rational agents. So they were only homo economici instead of homo reciprocans. And as always, today's lecture corresponds to some chapters in the book. So here being chapters 24 on team incentives and chapter 25 on team productions. And they are also the last chapters that we will treat in this book. Okay. But first of all, it's no coincidence to end this course with a class on teams. So modern organizations, they increasingly adopt teams and team-based working. Teams here, of course, simply referring to groups of 2 or more people within an organization that work together, so cooperate towards a common goal. Example of such teams are sales teams, service teams, but teams can also, of course, consist of people from different functions, different departments with different expertises. So there is also cross-functional teams, cross-departmental teams, cross-disciplinary teams. And because, of course, modern organizations increasingly rely on teams, there is a lot of attention, a lot of energy devoted both in the professional, but also in the scientific literature and in research on how we can build efficient and effective teams. The only thing you need to do is do a simple Google search to find like a ton of articles on the secrets of teamwork or successful teams. In addition, also think about the amount of job ads that specify collaboration or team player skills. So indeed, teams and team management, they are increasingly becoming, if they are not already, a cornerstone within modern organizations. Now, why is this the case? Of course, it's because teams, they offer organizations a couple of unique advantages compared to individual forms of working. For starters, they induce cooperation among employees. So you're less likely in teams to create a kind of competitive atmosphere, which, as we saw in last class, this can also have its drawbacks if there's too much competition. Teams also offer productivity benefits. When people work together on a common task or when they have a common goal, they are not only inclined to do it much faster, but by bringing together different ideas, different perspectives, and different talents, team can also perform better than the sum of the performance of its individual team members. And finally, teams also allow for specialization. So what I mean, it's not necessary that each employee does like an equal fraction of all the work. No. So teams, they also create the possibility for employees to play their strengths or play their preferences. If I, for example, hate direct contact with clients, but you love it and you are good at it, well, then it's better that you take care of this, and I do something else like cost calculations. Not only is specialization and playing to one's strengths much nicer for employees, but it also benefits the development of employees. It allows them to further develop their strengths, further develop their capabilities that they're good at. And also wants to stress with regards to strength use that this is a research line at our department. So Marianne van Woerkom, Christina Meyers, I think especially Christina, you saw in last block on talent management. Now, they specialize in how we can make use of strengths within the context of a team. So how we can make more effective teams to playing towards strengths and capitalizing onwards strengths. So if this is of interest to you for writing a bachelor thesis or a master thesis, I think this is something to keep in mind. Unfortunately, teams also come with a couple of challenges. And these challenges will actually be the core topic of today's class. So that is, first, how do we reward and motivate employees in teams? If you think about it, most reward schemes, they are based on individuals. But if we reward individuals within a team, there is the risk that they will start competing. However, where's the other solution then? Okay, rewarding the team. But if we reward the team, there's the risk of loafing, of free riding, of some team members sitting back and starting to relax. So how can we solve this issue? So not focusing too much on the individual, not focusing too much on the team. How can we balance this? This is something that we will treat today. Second issue, and that's partly related to the motivation question, is namely how do we organize team production? So team performance depends, of course, on the efforts of all group members. So how much should each team member contribute? And how do we ensure that all employees do their share? Okay, but let's first address the first question of team incentives. So how do we reward or motivate employees in a group? There's actually two obstacles to answering that question. First is that in teams, performance depends on several people. So team performance or team production is dependent on the individual performances of each of its members. Second is that often only that team performance or team production, that only this end result is visible to the organization. It's often impossible or very hard to single out each team member's individual contribution to that team performance or team production. And we call this non-contractable performance because it cannot be observed, it cannot be put in a contract. The perfect example here is a group paper by a student. So the success of a group paper of different students depends, of course, on the group efforts of all team members. But the only thing that the teacher will see is the group paper as result, so the team production. The teacher will not see how much effort each of the individual students has put in the paper. And we can, of course, create a kind of peer review system where we can simply ask each student individually how much he or she has contributed. But bear in mind, these are typically also noisy indicators, so they don't allow to put an exact number like a percentage to their contribution. In other words, what do we have to do here? In the case of the student paper, we have to give everybody the same reward, so the same grade, which might be fair, but might not be efficient or effective to motivate those students. So how do we go then about rewarding teams? Well, to reward teams, to motivate teams, there's actually two ways in which you can do that. And first thing is a kind of sharing rule. So there a bonus or a reward is allocated to the team as a whole and then split among each of the team members. We can, for example, do this equally, so an equally sharing rule. Best example here is a tip jar in a restaurant or in a bar, if you still remember after all this time what a restaurant or a bar is. So you have the tip jar, it's filled in throughout the evening or throughout the week, and then it's emptied and it's divided among all the people working in the bar. Or another example, all the associates in the firm. It's the end of the book year, and they divide the profit among each other at the end of the book year or fiscal year. Note that making such divisions, so inducing this kind of sharing rules, this does not have to be in an equal way. For example, it might be that a larger share of the bonus or the reward can be given to the team leader or to a team member that has more duties or has more difficult responsibilities. Second option to reward teams is a group piece rate. So this is identical to an individual piece rate, but here instead of instead of variable pay being tied to individual performance or effort, now it's tied to team performance or team efforts. For example, instead of paying car sellers according to how much sales they make, tying, for example, their compensation to the sales their dealership as a whole makes. And of course, by introducing these two new incentive schemes for teams, there's already two important differences that we can show here. First is that under group piece rates, rewards are proportional to the efforts of individual employees. So that is, if an employee works harder, team performance will prosper, that employee will get a higher reward. But this is not the case for sharing rules. Under sharing rules, an employee might work harder, but still get an equal or another pre-designed share. Second difference is that for organizations, sharing rules, they are typically more budget-friendly or more budget-balancing. So the organization can never spend more than what comes in under a sharing rule. When the waiters don't get tips in the jar, there is nothing to divide. If you think about it, especially in the US, tips are sometimes their main source of income. Group piece rates, on the other hand, they don't have that kind of protection. When there are no sales, and say, let's consider these employees also enjoy some kind of base pay. If there are no sales, the organization makes losses. Of course, this also applies to individual piece rates when there is positive base pay. Okay. All of the previous, of course, assumes that employees want to cooperate in the first place. If not, then we get the famous free riding problem. And this is a typical drawback of team-based reward schemes, and is also something we have probably all experienced personally. Important is that the free rider problem is more than just a rotten apple in a group. Free riding is a perfect rational response to team incentives, and it's a kind of response that lives in all of us. We all free ride from time to time because it's more efficient or effective to us in some situations. Now, the free rider problem is a tendency to perform less under team-based incentives, and it mostly occurs under sharing rules. And to demonstrate that it's a perfect, rationally economic response, consider the following. So suppose that we have an equal sharing rule in place. So under this rule, each team member would get 1 divided by n, or so the total of the group. So each team member gets 1/10 of the marginal benefits that's created by the group. So if we are a group of 10 and my work creates an additional value of 100 euros to the team, I've only created 10 euros in marginal benefits for myself. So based on that information and being a rational agent acting on information, I might decide that doing the extra effort is not worth 10 euros. And this effect also gets larger as the group gets bigger. If I create 100 euros of added value for 50 team members, this would mean that I would only get 2 euros of marginal benefit for myself. So as the group grows larger, there's actually a larger incentive to free ride. And this demonstrates one of the biggest drawbacks of team-based reward schemes, and one of the most important sources actually of the free riding problem is that in teams, all benefits are enjoyed, so the benefits are enjoyed by all the members, but the costs are borne by individual members. So there is always the risk that your investments in team efforts are larger than the returns. Result then is, of course, that each individual member might start to undervalue the benefits that their own efforts have for co-workers, resulting in lower performance and a lower contribution to team performance. And this also explains the low contribution of people to public goods, leading, of course, to the under-provision of those same public goods. Think about the environment. All countries, if you consider the countries as a team, Team Earth, all countries can do efforts to reduce global warming, and all countries can also enjoy the benefits. However, there is the risk that some countries will make a lot of investments and others don't. So anticipating this, anticipating that everybody can enjoy the rewards, but a few people have to make the investments, some countries might consider contributing less. So they will undervalue their benefits. They will undervalue the benefits of their own efforts to a common cause. Free riding is also illustrated in a study by Gnisi et al. And if you remember Gnisi, that's also the guy from the experiment on small stakes that we saw earlier. Now, Gnisi and his colleagues, they set up a nice experiment, and it's probably an experiment that we all would want to participate in, is that he let his students go out in dinner in groups of 6. Now, he faced his students with 2 conditions. So in the first condition, students had to pay everything they ordered themselves for this dinner. In the second condition, students would also go out to eat, but they would equally share the bill between the 6 of them. So if you think about it, this is the same like an equal sharing rule. That's probably also a situation that we can relate to in real life. So what was the difference between letting everybody pay for themselves or sharing the bill? Well, the results showed a modest increase in the number of items that were ordered in the team pay condition compared to the individual pay condition. So people ordered an average of 1.87 items in the team condition compared to 1.67 items in the individual condition. Okay, that's a difference, but it's not really a shocking one. More important, however, is that in the team condition, people were more inclined to order expensive items. So the bill in the team condition was on average 36% higher than individual condition. And finally, when asked to state their choice, would you rather prefer to pay for yourself or share the bill? A large majority selected individual pay, so paying the bill for themselves. And this suggests that the equal pay system was more economically efficient. Was less economically efficient because it made group members worse off. So in other words, people also anticipated that free riding would occur if they would have shared the bill. So the result of the Gnisi experiment, they are actually consistent with this theory of free riding. And they show that under team pay, under an equal sharing rule, free riding occurs. Okay, so we know free riding exists, we know there's experimental evidence for it. So how then can we organize group piece rates and sharing rules to avoid such rational but antisocial behavior that free riding is? Because well-designed group schemes, they can actually prevent free riding if we take into account some aspects. So let's first consider the case of group piece rates. So group piece rates, they have variable B's, and these variable B's, they are tied to group performance. To eliminate free riding in this scenario, we have to ensure that every employee gets paid exactly as much as the added value that he or she creates for the team. So for every euro the employee contributes to the team, this employee would also get €1, and that way we can avoid free riding. Unfortunately, that's not a realistic scenario, and this will often end up in organizations paying more money to the team than the team contributes to the organizations. So it's not budget neutral. For example, if I have a team of 4 employees and each employee creates €1 of added value, and I have to give them each €1 of added value back, then my account is empty. So it might reduce free riding, but as an organization, it's totally not financially stable. So how can we solve free riding and budget constraints through group piece rates? Simply by setting a target output M. And ideally, at this target output, the organization breaks even. So if the team supplies more than the target output, the team members get more. They get overpaid. If they supply less effort, they get less. So they are actually underpaid. And often, organizing a scheme in this way also implies that base pay, or A, is negative. So employees as a team only start making real money once the break-even point has been reached. So when they have an incentive to work for their money and refrain from free riding. However, group piece rates with such target outputs, they are not perfect either. First is that they incentivize employees to break even. And for that, think back about the experiment by Falk and Kosveld about the hidden cost of control in class 3. So there we saw that specifying a minimum amount of effort actually urges employees to go exactly for that minimum amount of effort. Second is that group piece rates, that they can actually stimulate sabotage from the side of the organizations. So in some contexts, organizations can misrepresent the team performance, so they have to pay them less. Think about the situation. Oh, have we reached target output yet? No, just a little bit, just a little bit. This is, of course, easier in teams because a single employee might have an idea of the effort that he or she has done. But it's more difficult to see how much a team is performing, how much output level has been reached when other people are involved. Third is the risk of overperformance. So if the team performs below target output, the organization is underpaying them due to negative base pay. If the team performs above target output, the organization is actually overpaying them. In other words, the more the team performs, the larger the share of profit the organization has to give to employees. Now, just imagine the situation that the team does exceptionally well. They totally go over the top. They totally go over target output. In this scenario, the organization risks getting no additional money from exceptional performance. Why? Because they have to give the team such a large share that they actually don't keep enough to remain financially stable. So better to set target output high enough in the first place. Finally, is that group piece rates are vulnerable to the state of nature, so to economic conditions. If the team can't meet the target output due to difficult economic circumstances or common shocks, they risk getting underpaid for a long period of time. So employees are less protected to common shocks under such schemes like group piece rates. Another way to prevent free riding is by considering group bonuses. So once team performance reaches a certain target level, so M, all output is distributive. You can compare this to an equal sharing rule, but now with output target. If team performance is lower than M, employees then get 0 or a lower reward, so acting as a kind of group punishment. And this group bonus system is actually a good way to induce employees in the team to perform and to reduce free riding. Because free riding can result in a kind of financial punishment in this scenario. Also, take into account, organization in this scenario not really has an incentive to misrepresent because there are not really financial risks for the organization involved. So employees can still overperform without risks to the organization. Two issues, however, here are that group bonus with target levels, they are typically less generous for individual employees than simple sharing rules. Why? Because they first have to supply a certain effort level. So employees can work their ass off while the rest of the team does nothing, and in the end, the team still fails the target. So you can work hard, but still end up with financial punishment. So these kind of incentive systems, they're less ideal for employees. And it also introduces some strategic considerations. Knowing that my teammates might free ride, should I do a lot of effort or not? Depends, of course, on who are my teammates. If my teammates do nothing, then it's better to do nothing as well if it will result in financial punishment anyway, because otherwise I would get punished for working hard. How your teammates behave, of course, is difficult to predict. There are multiple possibilities, there are multiple outcomes that are all rational from an economic point of view. Both working hard under group bonuses and doing nothing makes perfect economically sense here. We call these Nash equilibria. So Nash equilibria, they are different sets of actions that are consistent with one another. The existence of different such equilibria under group bonuses makes them very difficult to predict how employees will behave, and hence very difficult to coordinate how employees will react. And a story that nicely illustrates this strategic considerations is written on page 448 in the book, namely the pirate's tale. This tale goes as follows. So imagine some pirates on a ship, and they all have put their coins in a treasure chest, but in different bags. Unfortunately, then there's the big storm, and the chest gets overturned, and all the bags got mixed. So the captain says, of course, the captain wants to solve this issue, goes to each of the pirates and asks, okay, how much was in the bag? Of course, we know that the pirates lie. So the captain says, okay, each report to me privately how much was in your bag, and I will add up the sum. And if the numbers add up, I will give each his amount of coins back. If you lie to me and the sum doesn't add up, I will just throw the coins overboard. So in this case, M is the amount of coins. Throwing the chest overboard is the group punishment, so then everybody gets paid 0. Bonus here is the content of the chest for telling the truth. Note, however, that pirates here cannot overperform, so they cannot overtell the truth. Now, this situation creates strategic considerations, as there are two potential Nash equilibria. First one is, imagine I expect all my fellow pirates to lie, then I lie as well. Why? From a purely economic point of view, there is no point in me telling the truth, so making a performance if my fellow teammates don't do the same. Second option is that I tell the truth, because otherwise the reward is 0. So this illustrates these are two perfectly rational responses in this situation, but because it's hard to know how others will react, there's a kind of standstill here. So it's impossible to predict how the end results will be. Reality, fortunately, makes free riding a little bit more easy and a little less strategic than in the situation I've just sketched. This real employees, they have an important advantage over these theoretical models that we have seen so far. And that is the simple fact that they can see each other's performance in the team. Remember, this is an information advantages that team members have, that their boss or that the organization does not have. And the organization only sees the end products. So what do normal teams often do by seeing each other's performance is, when you have a free rider, let's say in a work group, you know who that person is, and you can also approach this person. And for example, you go to that person and say, okay, you better start contributing now, so you discipline the free rider. Or you can threaten to throw that person out of the group, so engage in peer pressure. Or after talking with the person who has engaged in free riding, you might find out that he or she has family issues or struggles to make adequate contributions, so you can also watch each other's back in the team and help each other to contribute. In other words, in reality, employees, they informally monitor each other, they reward, they punish each other, and these are actually very powerful forces against free riding, as we will see in the remaining of this presentation. In some cases, even peer pressure can make team incentives more effective than individual piece rates. And as usual, there is also some experimental evidence to back these claims up. Now, most experimental evidence on free riding, they come from so-called public good games, or voluntary contribution mechanisms, so VCM in short. Now, how do these good games work? Basically, they give participants some money, and then these participants can decide how much of this money they will contribute to a common pool. And often contributing to a common pool is also associated with a reward. An example of such a public good game, or VCM, is also shown on slide. So in this example, participants are divided in groups of 4. They each get 20 euros. Participants can then choose, of course, how much of these 20 euros they will put in a common pool. But all money contributed to the common pool is then multiplied by 1.6 and then divided by 4 again. Now consider what can happen in this scenario. If everybody says, okay, I contribute nothing, I contribute 0, nothing is added to the pool, nobody gets anything extra, but everybody keeps their 20 euros. Now, suppose that everybody contributes 10, then everybody will get 26 in the end, because 10 euros multiplied by 4 participants is 40, multiplied by 1.6 is 64, and 64 divided by 4 is 16. So each participant gets 16 euros, taking into account the remaining 10 euros that is not contributed, equals 26 euros, or a profit of 6 euros by contributing. Now, imagine that everybody pitches in 20, but I am free riding a little bit, so I'm only contributing 10. Now, what will my reward be? So I only contribute 10, but now there is 10 plus 20 times 3, so the other participants, they contribute 3 in the pool. This makes a total of 70, so 10 plus 60 times 1.6. This equals 112. If we divide it by 4 again, this is 28. Of course, I've only put 10 in the pool, so I remain with 38. So by free riding, I have now 38 euros, while the others have 10 euros less, so they have 28 euros. Of course, imagine this situation, everybody's contributed 10, everybody's contributed 20, I only 10, and I still get more in the end than they do. Everybody is going to hate my guts, so they might engage in some kind of informal corrective actions. And the example that I've just given, so with this contribution to this common pool, is also the basic setup for the following experiment. An experiment by Fehr and Gechter on altruistic punishment. Now, what Fehr and Gechter did is they divided employees in groups of 4. So they gave each other also 20 lab dollars, so fake dollars, like the example I've just given. Participants could choose how much to contribute to the pool, and the amount in the pool was multiplied by 1.6, and then divided by 4 again. So exactly like in the example that I've just given. Participants did this game 6 times, so there were 6 rounds, but they never interacted with the same people again. Okay, so what did they find out after these 6 rounds? Well, in the first few rounds, they saw that the average contribution of participants was about 10. Now, this is important because if we would assume that participants are purely rational actors, then we would expect they would contribute much less. So what happens here is participants, they contribute more than a rational agent, but less than the social optimal. So a rational agent would contribute 0, or a very minimum amount, but a socially optimal agent would contribute the maximum amount, because of course if everybody contributes 20, then the participants also get the highest rewards. So researchers concluded in the beginning of the experiments, the subjects were just being nice, they were just being socially desirable to each other. However, as each of the rounds continues, subjects' contributions sharply decreased. So while they started by contributing 10 lab dollars, at the end of the experiment, this was like 5 lab dollars. So 50% less. This is where this experiment ended, but other studies, they have found that as we increase the number of rounds, that actually behavior of participants tends to converge towards 0 contributions. But it's not where Fair and Gachter stopped. So overjoyed at what they found, they introduced an additional treatment. Namely, they decided to give participants the opportunity to punish each other. So after some interactions, participants could punish another participant if they thought that he or she had contributed too little. And they could do this by taking away 3 lab dollars from that participant. This action was, of course, not free. If they wanted to punish another participant, it costed them 1 lab dollar, and they could also do it multiple times. Now, how would this affect the experiment? Well, from a purely neoclassic point of view, so the rational agents, if participants were true rational agents, they would never punish. Why? Because it hurts their profit. And we know that rational agents, they always want to maximize their own financial gain. There were also no repeated interactions. Why is this important? Well, from a rational point of view, it might make sense to punish in the beginning to set a kind of example. So free riding would be reduced in the rounds that followed. So if there were repeated interactions, rational agents could engage in punishment to maximize financial gain in long term. This was not the case here because participants, they only interacted once with each other. So actually they had no incentive to benefit or to punish free riders. The only ones who would benefit from their punishing would be the others that would interact with this punished participants in later rounds. So punishment in this sense was altruistic, and hence also the title of the slide, altruistic punishment, because it only benefited others. True rational agents would only consider themselves and their own financial gain. They would not punish to multiply others' financial gain. But that's what participants did in this experiment. Now, results are graphically displayed on the following slides. You will see it split in an A and B panel. It's because the researchers also played a bit with the order of punishment and non-punishment options. You can ignore that. It's better to look a bit at the overall picture. If you look at the overall picture, what we see is that cooperation clearly increases in the punishment condition. So we see the average contribution here starts at, let's say, 12-ish and increases towards 16-ish. If we look at the scenario without punishment, we see the reverse. So as I said before, here we start at 10, and after 6 rounds, we decrease until we are about around 6. So punishment actually increases cooperation. Without punishment, there's a decrease in cooperation. So we can indeed conclude that the option of punishment had a strong effect on cooperation. Punishment not only reduced free riding, it also had the reverse effect. Cooperation started much higher and it increased cooperation. Why did it start so higher? Probably because participants, they anticipated punishment. So this means that under the right circumstances, teams actually cooperate more than traditional economic theory would predict. Researchers also saw that participants used this opportunity to punish a lot. So the motive to do so was, so they investigated also why do participants engage in punishing. if it's not rational. So it's not rational because it's not to increase their own profit. It's not really altruistic to help others. Rather, they actually found that the main reason that participants frequently engaged in punishing was purely emotional. So just anger directed at the free riders. And they explained that this strong sense of punishment and this righteous anger might have to do with human sensitivity to fairness and the tendency to discipline others actually being very much rooted in our culture and biology. Okay, interesting experiment. Before we move on, maybe a small recap. So, first we saw the Kinesia experiment on sharing the restaurant bill, and there we saw that individual pay was actually more effective than team pay. Individual pay eliminated free riding, and it also resulted in participants being more cooperative. So, meaning being more considerate with financial resources. However, in the Fair and Gachter experiment, we saw that punishment, so a kind of peer pressure, could also reduce and actually reverse some of that free riding. So if you connect the dots here, is individual pay always less effective than team pay? Or can certain forms of team pressures make team pay more economic in some circumstances? And this question is central to the study by Babcock et al. Babcock did a study in the library of the University of California, Santa Barbara. And in their experiment, they paid students to make visits to the library. So imagine in normal circumstances, Tilburg University doing that would be far more crowded than it is already. Okay, so they paid students to visit the library, and there was an individual condition and a team condition, so two conditions. In the individual condition, a student would get $2 per visit, and on top of that, a bonus of $25 if he or she made 4 or more visits that week. So this is basically an individual incentive scheme. Now, in the team conditions, students were matched with another student. So each student also got $2 for each time they visit. But there was also a bonus of $25 for each. So same incentive schemes. But now, in order to get a bonus, both students needed to visit the library at least 4 times. So this is not only a team incentive scheme, it's also a less generous one, because it sets a higher bar for the same rewards. So instead of you only being responsible, you only having to visit 4 times in order to get the $25, now both you and your mate, which you can't control, have to visit the library at least 4 times to get the same $25. Now, how do we expect participants to behave? Well, we expect that each participant will visit the library 4 times. So if you're an individual, you say, okay, $25, quick money, I just go 4 times to the library and consider it done. In the team condition, it's a bit more tricky, as I already indicated a bit. So if you visit the library 4 times, but your teammate only once, you basically did efforts for nothing, only for the $2. So we would actually expect rationally self-interesting students to visit the library less. So just 4 or less than 4 times. However, if you look at the results, so individual conditions 2.3 and the team conditions 2.7. So big anti-climax over here. The results actually show the opposite. So individual condition, students made an average of 2.33 visits, and only 46% visited the library at least 4 times. This rose to 2.73 in the team conditions and 5.2.9 respectively in the team incentive condition. Now, remember, this is strange, so participants here, they do more and at the same time for less generous incentives. So why do participants act so strange here? And to learn why this was the case, Babcock and the colleagues, they did a follow-up. experiment. So what they did is they give participants a choice between the individual and the team condition. And here we see, similar to the Gnesi experiment, a large majority, so 95% of students actually, they preferred the individual treatment. This should come as no surprise, because in this scenario you have to exert less effort to get the bonus. So just 4 visits and you get the 25. So why the higher team efforts? Well, second thing the researchers did to find out was they matched students again in teams, but now they did so anonymously. So in the original experiment, participants, they also got each other's name and contact information. So there was a face to the mate. Now they teamed up students with each other, but students did not know each other's identity. They just had to make 4 visits independently of each other. So they were a kind of anonymous team. And what did the researchers see here? Visits dropped sharply in this anonymous condition. Potential reason to here is the personal interaction and the positive or negative reinforcements that goes along with such interaction that actually induced higher team efforts in the original case. But a more important reason they found in the exit interviews that they did with the participants after the experiment was finished. So they actually found out that the real reason was that participants in the team, they didn't want to let each other down. So the real reason that efforts were higher in the team condition here was guilt, or the avoidance of unpleasant feedback that induced participants towards higher team efforts. But this was mostly the case in the non-anonymous condition, because 28% of the anonymous participants felt guilt, while simply the fact of knowing the other, the fact of having some kind of personal interaction or face to it, raised the feelings of guilt to 55%. So in a nutshell, peer pressure can make some team incentive systems more effective than individual incentive systems. Why? Because the positive and negative reinforcement that personal interactions in the team create. But also because people want to avoid guilt, they want to avoid unpleasant feedback. And in fact, some people assert that these psychological dynamics in teams, they might be more effective than some HRM policies or practices. The latter are also explained, they're also offered an explanation for the good performance of teams in some extreme environments, like the military, like the police, or some care professions. Of course, however, it's important to remain critical. We see that both in Gnesi and Babcock experiments, participants, when given the choice, they avoided the team conditions whenever they could. First reason, of course, is that team incentives, they reduce employees' utility. So they set a higher bar for comparable incentives. Second is that team pressure works, but employees might dislike such pressure. As a result, organizations that have team incentives in place, they actually might find it harder to attract and retain talented employees. Might be more advisable for these kind of organizations to seek to stimulate efforts in other ways. For example, through tournaments, which we have seen in last class, can also incentivize groups of people efficiently and effectively. Okay, but if you are critical, you'll also note that both Gnesi and Babcock, that they worked with student samples. So you might wonder, okay, what about the advantages of teams in real workplaces? Now, one observational study that looked at the advantages of teams in an actual workplace is an observational study by Hamilton in a Japanese garment factory, Koret. And remember, I also said it in the previous lecture, so why Japanese again as a setting? Around that time, so 80s, 90s, there was the craze in management about all things Japanese. So they studied Koret. So Koret is a Japanese garment factory. And the second half of the 90s, this factory switched from an individual production system of garments to team production of garments in groups of 6 to 7 employees. Second transition is they made is they also adjusted their compensation accordingly. They did so by moving from individual piece rates to group piece rates with an equal sharing rule. Finally, they also want to smoothen the process to better adapt to customer demands. They did so by adopting an inventory control system. Now, what you need to know about inventory control systems is that they typically try to make the supply chain in a firm more efficient or more effective, and they do so by visualizing to-dos and bottlenecks in the production process to all employees. So think about an inventory control system like a big to-do list or checkbox somewhere central in the firms. So for all employees to see, so they know what needs to be done, what the problems are, and they can act and respond. Now at Corrad, this took a very simple form. So they had within the group simple wooden sticks on which they hung the unfinished garments as they moved from team member to team member within the group of 6 to 7 employees. Now, all employees could see the stick with the garments on it. This created also some kind of team pressure. Say that my job is to sew the sleeves on, and I see there are no garments that need sleeves on the stick, then I can do my job. So then I will tell my teammates, come on, hurry up. And this is also what these researchers who work together with Hamilton observed in this firm, is production rose by 18%. And this was mainly because employees engaged in a kind of peer pressure. So actually during interviews, some managers even asserted that employees, they were more strict towards one another than managers would usually be towards the employees. But it's important there was not purely drill at Corrad. Employees also indicated that they very much enjoyed team-based production, so also very important. So they found it a more rewarding experience. Moreover, some unique benefits of this way of working also emerged here. So employees, they shared some tips and tricks. They not just pressured each other, but they also watched each other's back. They also helped each other where necessary. So in other words, when employees' financial compensation and their output, when those two depend on each other, team members also have strong incentives to monitor each other, to pressure each other, but also to help each other, to share information, and even to engage in mutual training. So this, of course, in sharp contrast to the tournament that we saw last class. So certain team incentive systems combined with some informal helping behavior, information sharing, and reducing free riders can actually make team incentives more productive than tournaments or than individual incentive systems in some cases. So to summarize today, we found that sharing rules were not efficient. Why? Because they incite free riding. They might be fair, but they might also induce free riding. Employees also only receive a part of the additional value that they create for the team, and this incentivizes them to devaluate their efforts and reduce their efforts as such. In this sense, group piece rates, they might be better. Why? Because group piece rates tie compensation to group outputs. But group piece rates are not perfect either. They are not financially stable. If you want to make them financially stable, we have to combine that with target output levels. And those target output levels, in turn, they incite employees to do the bare minimum, as we also saw in class 3 with the experiment by Falk and Kosveld. Alternatively, if we have these kind of target output levels in place, might also induce organizations to misrepresent their output. Because of course, as long as employees work under the target, they are underpaying. Organizations are underpaying them. Once they go over target output, organizations are overpaying them. So it provides the organizations an incentive to misrepresent the output to the team. Also, when economic circumstances are dire, the performance of the whole group and hence the compensation of all team members plummet. So group peace rates, they are very vulnerable to the state of nature. Group bonuses, they might also be more efficient, and they give the organization no incentive to represent because they are more financially stable. But getting these bonuses depends on the behavior of others in the team. And as there might be different sets of coherent actions, so multiple Nash equilibria, it might induce strategic considerations and coordination problems. So group bonuses, they are not an all fix either. Okay? But this gives might give a bit of a negative picture. So the overall impression in summary might be that team incentive systems are less effective. They're also less preferred by individuals over individual incentive systems. But experimental evidence shows that mechanisms like peer pressure, punishment, monitoring, helping behavior, and information systems, that those informal systems in teams might make team incentives more effective and reduce free riding, in some instances making them more effective than individual incentive schemes or even tournaments. The reason is that team incentives, that they also capitalize on information that is possessed by employees in the team, information that is not directly visible to bosses or to the organization as a whole. Hence, an important conclusion of today and of this class is that informal interactions between peers in a team, while often undervalued or invisible, that these might be important complements to some incentive systems in organizations. With this being said, I end the course on personal economics. Thank you for listening to this YouTube channel despite the circumstances and so on. I will also give information about the examination soon. This being said, I hope you remain safe and sound. You can always email me with questions you have about the course so far. And maybe we see each other again soon.